Imagine a ship so powerful that after just one battle, Britain began sending more and more forces to search for it. That ship was called the Bismarck. It set out on its first major campaign in May 1941. A few days later, it would sink the famous British battleship Hood, and then find itself at the bottom of the Atlantic. Today we'll examine how this happened and why it took the British an entire operation to sink a single battleship. In May 1941, World War II had already been raging for nearly 2 years. For Great Britain, the Atlantic Ocean remained one of the most critical theaters of operations. Food, fuel, weapons, and other essential resources were being shipped into the country via the Atlantic. German submarines already posed a serious threat to British supply lines, but now a new threat had emerged. A large German battleship capable of operating far from its home ports. Its name was the Bismarck. The ship was about 251 meters long. Its full load displacement exceeded 50,000 metric tons. Its main armament consisted of 8 380mm guns, housed in 4 twin-gun turrets. The armor belt in the most heavily protected areas reached approximately 320 millimeters, and its maximum speed exceeded 30 knots. It was not just a large ship. It was a sophisticated combat system designed for operations on the open ocean, and that is precisely why the British command could not allow such a ship to operate freely against merchant shipping. On May 19, 1941, the Bismarck, together with the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, left Gdynia. Operation Rhine exercises had begun. The goal was to reach the Atlantic and attack British maritime communications. But the German group did not go unnoticed. The British began receiving intelligence about the ship's movements. And very soon, the hunt began. And this is where things get really interesting. While the Bismarck is trying to make its way into the Atlantic, Britain already knows it's on the move. But the British don't yet realize the most important thing. In a few days, this ship will become the target of one of the largest naval hunts of the war. On May 23rd, the German force was spotted by the British cruisers Norfolk and Suffolk. They did not engage in a decisive battle. Their main task was to monitor the German ships and relay information to British forces. On the morning of May 24th, the situation changed. The German task force was met by 2 large British ships, the battlecruiser Hood and the battleship Prince of Wales. The Hood was one of the Royal Navy's most famous ships. It held immense symbolic significance for Britain, but now it was about to engage the Bismarck in battle. An artillery duel began. Shells flew back and forth between the ships across the Danish Strait, and soon an event occurred that shook Britain. The Hood sustained fatal damage and sank. Of the approximately 1,400 crew members, only 3 survived. The exact cause of the ship's catastrophic destruction is debated by historians, but one thing is certain. The Hood was lost in a matter of minutes, but the victory did not mean that the Bismarck emerged from the battle unscathed. The British Prince of Wales struck the German battleship several times. The Bismarck sustained damage and began to lose fuel. Now the German command faced a dilemma. Continuing the original raid was becoming increasingly dangerous. Instead of advancing further into the Atlantic, the Bismarck was to head for the French coast. But after the sinking of the Hood, the British had no intention of letting it get away. On May 24th, Britain lost one of its most famous ships. But with that loss, the mission itself changed. Now the goal was no longer simply to keep watch on the Bismarck. They had to find it and stop it. After the sinking of the Hood, the British command committed significant forces to the search for the Bismarck. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and aircraft were involved in the operation. Among the main forces were the battleships King George V and Rodney. Other ships also altered their courses to block possible escape routes. In effect, a vast search net began to form around the German ship. But the Bismarck managed to temporarily shake off its pursuers. At one point, British observers lost sight of it. For the Germans, this was their chance. If the ship could reach the French coast, the operation would continue from a protected base. However, the British continued their search. Intelligence, radio interception, and aerial surveillance played a key role. On May 26th, the British search team finally managed to pinpoint the Bismarck's position again. Now, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal joined the operation. Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers took off from its deck. These aircraft were already considered obsolete, but it was they who were to deliver the strike that would change the fate of the largest ship in this story. The first attack was unsuccessful, then another attack followed. One of the torpedoes damaged the Bismarck's steering mechanism. The rudders became jammed, and that was the turning point. The powerful battleship still had its engines, armor, and guns intact. But now, it could no longer steer properly. It could no longer simply escape its pursuers. That's the paradox of the whole story. The Bismarck wasn't sunk by a single powerful hit. First, it was rendered unable to maneuver properly. And at that moment, the massive battleship, which just a few hours earlier had been trying to escape the British, found itself effectively trapped. Throughout the night, the British ships continued their pursuit. The Bismarck remained a formidable opponent. But now the British had a crucial advantage. They knew where it was. By the morning of May 27th, British battleships had closed in on it. The King George V and the Rodney opened fire. The final battle began. The Bismarck's artillery systems continued to operate. Its 380mm guns could fire at enormous ranges, but the German ship was in an extremely precarious position. It could not maneuver properly. Many of its systems were damaged. The fire from the British ships was becoming increasingly effective. Gradually, the Bismarck's main guns ceased to pose the threat they once did. But the ship was still afloat. That is precisely why the final stage of the battle lasted quite a long time. The British inflicted more and more damage. The ship was losing its ability to fight back. However, determining the single cause of the Bismarck's sinking is much more complicated than is often portrayed in popular movies and videos. There is evidence of numerous hits from British shells and torpedoes. There are accounts from the German crew regarding the ship's flooding. Later investigations of the sunken ship also revealed extensive damage. But the question of exactly which combination of damages directly led to the sinking remains a subject of historical debate. One thing is certain: on May 27, 1941, the Bismarck sank. 2 days ago, the Bismarck was the hunter. Now it has become the hunted. But the main question arises: why did Britain deploy so many forces against a single ship in the first place? The answer has to do with more than just its guns. Britain depended on the Atlantic. Vital maritime routes ran across the ocean. If the Bismarck had been able to operate freely alongside other German naval forces, it could have posed a serious threat to merchant shipping. That is precisely why the destruction of this battleship was of immense strategic importance. Furthermore, the situation following the sinking of the Hood had become even more serious. The British fleet had to demonstrate that the German ship could not destroy one of the Royal Navy's main symbols and then simply vanish. Therefore, substantial forces were dispatched to search for it. But the story of the Bismarck reveals something even more important. The power of a modern warship is determined not only by the thickness of its armor or the caliber of its guns. The Bismarck was superbly armed. It was fast. It had powerful armor protection, but an entire system was working against it. Intelligence detected it, cruisers tracked it, aircraft searched for it. Torpedoes restricted its maneuverability, and then the battleships engaged in the decisive battle. It was precisely the coordination of different types of forces that made the ship's destruction possible. The Bismarck spent only a few days on its first major operation, but in those few days, it made history. On May 24th, it sank the Hood. On May 27th, she herself sank to the bottom of the Atlantic, and her story became one of the most famous examples of how, in modern warfare, even the most powerful ship can be helpless in the face of a well-organized hunt. The Bismarck entered the Atlantic as a symbol of German naval power, but its first voyage turned out to be its last. And perhaps that is precisely why this story remains so fascinating to this day. It depicts a confrontation between more than just two ships. It was a battle between technology, intelligence, aviation, artillery, and human decision-making. A single battleship was able to challenge a large part of the British fleet. But to destroy it, Britain had to combine many different forces into a single operation. And therein lies the main lesson of the Bismarck story. In modern warfare, a single powerful ship can be a formidable weapon. But against an entire system, it is no longer invincible.